Welcome to Provocative Conversations from Twice 5 Miles Radio. I'm your host, James Navé. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today, my guest is David Lamb. David lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I invited David to be on the show because David is an entrepreneur and a business leader who has a deep interest in supporting the arts and studying how cultures interact with each other around the world. A couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity to spend a fair amount of time with David because he was responsible for sponsoring two very well-known Navajo weavers from northern New Mexico near the Four Corners. They gave demonstrations of how to weave these beautiful Navajo rugs. They spent the entire Saturday of the Leaf Festival talking to people about what they do, how they do it. David was responsible for bringing these two women to Leaf, and he was at Leaf as well. So I had a chance to interact with him. And the more David and I talked, the more I enjoyed what he had to say. I most especially enjoyed David's story about how his great-great-great-grandfather, just after the Civil War, traveled from the East Coast to the Pacific Northwest and established a timber operation. David's family is still involved in that kind of business, plus other businesses as well. So I knew when we were talking, David had insight that I didn't have. So it was really good fun to sit there and talk with him. It was really interesting to talk with David about his take on the world in 2025 and the things that he's up to, like sponsoring the Navajo weavers to Leaf. And not only did he get my attention with the story of his great-great-grandfather coming to the Pacific Northwest, or his great-great-great-great-grandfather, I'm not sure which great it is, but it's a long time ago. The other thing he said that really got my attention, he said, if you're wanting to live in the world and do business in an ethical way, there are three principles you have to follow. Have fun, make money, do right. So as you might imagine, I was quite intrigued with David's three principles. We talked about it quite a bit. And as we were talking, I decided to invite him on to the show. How about a provocative conversation? David, you want to join me on Twice 5 Miles Radio? He said, sure, I'd love to. Send me an invitation. So I did. So what you're getting ready to hear is our conversation, and it begins with David discussing his three principles. And the conversation goes from there to a bit of history about how his family established the business in the Pacific Northwest. And we conclude with David's take on the Navajo weavers in northern New Mexico near the Four Corners area. So here's David talking about his three principles. Off we go.
Well, I think, Navé, that part of the strength of the mantra, in my experience seeing it deployed, is that it isn't just one part. It's all three parts. Everything we do must meet all three criteria. I've seen people who are really happy with things that aren't economically viable, and that's a recipe for disaster. I've seen people who have done things that they're giggling about that are economically viable but aren't doing right, by whatever measure you want to call it. The three things are inextricably linked together. Top of the list for have fun in the experience of deploying that mantra in my business is it's a really tough business. And if you let it get you down, if you don't have a sense of humor, it will kill you. If you're in an environment where half the people have a sense of humor, or even one does not, it's a buzzkill for the whole organization. Whereas if you have a calamity befall you and everybody looks up from the table and said, well, now wasn't that funny, and can laugh about it, that becomes the basis for addressing the calamity. You don't seek fault, you seek a commonality of the humor of the circumstance.
So when you are having fun from that point of view, it's closely tied to a sense of humor. Is that what I'm
Yes.
hearing you say?
Well, a sense of humor and simply to fix our faces in a smile and a frown, and it's only a matter of choice whether we do one or the other. And if you're with people who are always anxious to fix their face in a smile, I think our lives are warmer and richer.
How do we know we're doing right?
Character shows in moments of extremis. You will find yourself in a moment of extremis for whatever reason, and you can take one of two courses, or maybe more. If Do right is part of the mantra of you're going to use that criteria to evaluate your choices. If one of them, for example, would result in a favorable outcome in the way of making money, for example, but would unjustly destroy the character of someone else, you don't want to do that. Go ahead and lose the money, lose the celebration, the fame, but do right. When you start to think about that, there are all kinds of scenes in film where a leadership is entirely about choices. Leadership is for people who have courage. And the do right is really setting your personal bar to remind yourself to summon the courage to do something that ain't necessarily the easy choice. The do right is really, there's a simple answer to every question, and it's usually wrong. People look to a leader to make choices, and a leader says, we're going over here because it's the right thing to do. It's going to be harder, going to require us to raise more money or whatever, but it's the right thing to do. Then the whole organization is galvanized and modeled around that example of character. I spent the first 35 years of my career in a family owned business working with people who loathed one another. They were jealous, they were backbiting. So I grew up in a petri dish of evil and unproductive, and we weren't having fun and we weren't making money and we weren't doing right. When I went broke in 2001, the first thing I did was assemble a team of people, and I didn't really assemble them. A team of people joined in league together who liked one another. We don't spend time on people who didn't like one another. I had suggested to the group that we include one of the people from the old organization, and they all said, no, that guy's poison. Don't do that. That was enlightening to me. I saw the guy for what he had been and not for the poison that he was. One of the things I've learned as a leader is you've got to be the one who listens to the voice of the organization and says, oh, well, we're trying to drag Navé along and he just doesn't fit here. We got to send him down the road.
So you said you went broke in 2001. What did that look like, and how were you able to adjust and return to solvency?
It was an act of desperation. I had a company that nominally employed 1,000 people, but it was dependent on not selling 1,000 widgets, but on getting very large projects, 5, 10, $20 million projects that would keep that employment base rolling for a long time. We had a huge boom in 87, 88, 89, 90. We had a lot of really talented people. And suddenly the demand that had justified increasing the workforce to that level was going away. And the only game left on the table was in Asia. Our clients in Asia operated in a very, very different capitalization model than our clients in North America, Europe, and even South America. And basically, we put our balance sheet behind the prospect of keeping people working by taking orders in Asia. And one of the quickest ways to improve your cash flow is to stop paying your bills. And that's what happened. My Asian customers quit paying their bills, and I'm left with 1,000 mouths, and the bank is not going to lend me any more money. So they foreclosed on my business. There were some highly technical things that allowed us to resurrect from going broke. We took 7 companies through bankruptcy in 6 countries in the period from 2001 to 2003. Eventually we got things sorted out. And this is one of the wonderful things about the United States of America is we have these laws that allow us to recover from a bankruptcy. And a lot of people got hurt, but we got going back again. And before you knew it, we were 90 days into 7 people running the business, and we got a cash flow positive. And then we grew from there. And in the background, we were so desperate for that business in Asia was that the industry has changed. We were linked to the pulp and paper industry, and you need do nothing more than remember the Wall Street Journal the first time you picked it up, and the Wall Street Journal today, if you can find one and print it on paper. That's the story. We were riding a dinosaur. It was dying, and when it fell down, it crushed a lot of people. We were not the only supplier to the pulp and paper industry who went broke in that era because they were all doing the same thing.
So, how did you know how to do all of that? That's quite a complicated proposition. Were you doing this by yourself?
We had a spectacular board of directors who were very experienced. They saw what was happening and they would tell me what was happening, and I wasn't listening. Our company is 150 years old, and my dad started teaching me at age 13. So by the time I was forced to pull some of the levers that allowed us to recover, I knew where the levers were. I knew how to grasp them. I knew what the effect of pulling them was. That allowed us to advance. I had a fantastic bankruptcy attorney. He wasn't out to pick the meat off the bones. He was really giving good advice. I wasn't his first client to go broke. He had techniques that we deployed that were very effective, and the bank got paid back. Our vendors didn't get paid back, but our bank did. And the funny thing, Navé, we went broke. The trade got badly stiffed. 6 months later, every one of those vendors who was stiffed was back doing business with us because we'd cleaned things up. American bankruptcy law allowed us to get out of it, restore our business. We were back on track in 2003, and we've been steaming forward ever since.
So, fiscal responsibility is something works underneath the idea of make money.
Those three things are each equal in their imperativity, if that's a word. If you're running a nonprofit and you're helping a lot of people, but you're not making enough money to buy healthcare insurance for your employees, you don't have a viable organization. One of the lies that a lot of industry says, and we may be sitting on top of one of those bubbles today, is oh, you got to spend a huge amount of money in order to develop a technology for the future. I learned that the future may never come. You've got to make money every single day with what you're doing. And if you're able to do that and develop new technologies, well, then you're one of the smart kids.
So, to scale, you're doing well. You have a lot of business unfolding right in front of you. Someone listening to this show may be a solo person, someone thinking, gee, I love what these guys are talking about. How do I, as the solo person just starting out, how do I rescale these notions to fit me?
I do a lot of Jedi training. I have a lot of young entrepreneurs, some of whose companies we've invested in. Some just get sent to me because people know that, David Lamps had his head handed to him and can help you to not have that happen. The old saw that if you do something you love, you'll never work a day in your life. So if you love making poetry, then that's the place to focus. One of the biggest problems that entrepreneurs have is this diffusion of effort. I have a good friend who really wants to be a filmmaker, but he's also in real estate and he's good at both. And I tell him, you got to pick one and forsake all others. Pick one and devote your life, your fortune, your sacred honor to that. You have to understand how much capital will be required in order to serve and fulfill your passion and bring it to profitability.
How would you focus this down onto one person? For example, the slam poets who came to the Leaf Festival, most of those poets have an eye on making a living as a performance artist. So, what about them? How does it work for them?
The young poet who drove up from New Orleans, part of his mission in that idea is it's going to cost me $400 to drive up and back to Black Mountain. Do I have that money? Do I know where I'm going to stay in Black Mountain? Am I going to get a surprise? Do I have some money stored up in case my axle breaks on the way up there? Can I take care of that? Then I'm driving up to Black Mountain. There's one prize, it's $1,000. What are my odds of winning that prize? I'm thinking of that young man. I'm thinking, that's really a bad bet. Have fun, make money, do right. You want to do those things that have a high probability of keeping you solvent. No matter what your effort is, it's got to have the promise to maintain your solvency. If you're just doing it to raise awareness, that's an ego gratification that will lead you to ruin.
What's the difference between raising awareness and effective marketing?
One way or the other, you got to pay for it. Whether you call it effective marketing or whether you call it raising awareness, you got to pay the rent next week. And if you're busy doing marketing and you don't pay the rent, then you're going to end up on the street. And that's not the awareness you were hoping to raise.
Absolutely right. And yet, in order for me, the solo poet, to go out and have someone pay me a living wage in order to do this, I somehow have to get the attention of enough people in order to be able to make that happen. And that's a crevasse in the
Yeah.
program.
Well, it is, and I mean, I was married to an actress for a long time, and she joined 2,500 beautiful women in an audition, and she finished second three times, and she was just riding the subway up and down New York. If you're flying from New York to LA to audition for a part, and you don't get three in a row, God's telling you something. It's up to you to listen. And acting is like that. Poetry may be like that. I don't know. Ideally, an example, I can dream this up if I'm doing Jedi training. Navé gets hired by a major poetry venue to come and be an MC. So you're getting paid your airfare and a stipend, you're living in their housing, and maybe you get to perform in one of their things. But your principal role there is to get paid as an MC for their poetry events. Now you're advancing your career. Maybe your dream in life isn't to constantly MC poetry events, but that is the way of advancing things without, selling a kidney to go up to New York.
So, how do you coach someone who's trying to move forward in that arena and they're having trouble getting the attention? I've heard it said, if you can't get somebody's attention, you're selling the wrong thing, switch over to something else. Go into pizza. Don't try
Yeah.
to sell rocks.
Well, I think it's part of the conversations that you and I had together. I tell the nonprofits that my foundation supports, every development director, if you wake up in the morning thinking of something other than names, you're thinking about the wrong thing. If you aspire to a career in poetry, you want to be thinking of all the names of people who you can engage with by telephone, by email, on social media, to make them aware of what it is you're doing. In the entertainment business, it's hard because people will call up and say, "Man, I really need your help." And like that's the 16th call like that I've gotten this morning. You get a sense of judgment. I think that if a young poet wanted counsel, they would call Navé. And Navé would say, you're really good at this. And you might want to focus on talking to Tom, Dick, or Harry in New Orleans to advance your career. They're in New Orleans, but maybe they don't know Tom, Dick, or Harry. Or maybe they know Tom, Dick, or Harry, but you can call Tom, Dick, or Harry on their behalf and say, hey, this young Deborah Demansky, she slammed it up there in Black Mountain. You got to give her a listen. And that's the other kind of feature in the landscape is networking. And you're good at that. You understand that. Paul Pasquarello, our mutual friend who introduced us, is spectacular at networking. There's a sad moment when you tell somebody that and say, oh, but I don't like to do that. I'm shy. Well, you're going to die.
I know when I was doing the original poetry work years ago, it started out, I think I may have told you this, it started at the Storytelling Festival in Jonesboro, Tennessee. I saw storytellers telling stories, and I thought I'd like to do this as well. What could I do? And I connected with a fellow named Bob Falls, and he said, well, let's memorize poems and perform them as theater for school students and pitch the idea to people who book assembly programs in schools and say, we will perform the poems in your school from your school textbook.
Yeah.
Those poems will fit into your classroom. And when we come, we'll excite the students, come into the classroom, teach the students how to perform poetry as a way of studying it.
Yeah.
And then we made call after call after call after call after call. And the idea was it was useful, it fell on fertile ground, and it was easily employed. We were malleable to each school. We would go to a library, go to an auditorium, gymnasium, classroom, didn't matter. It really worked. And we didn't make a lot of money at it, but this was in the 80s. We were grossing $500,000 a year
That's a lot of money.
traveling all over the country with teams of poets, not just me, but there were a number of us out there all at the same time doing these shows. We didn't keep a lot of it. We weren't that experienced business wise, but we really did create that momentum. But it was all about those connections. And it was all about need. So I'd love for you to reflect a bit on the idea of business and need. I know you're in the business of helping people process wood products. So
Yeah.
there's a big need for wood products. Look around, all the tables, all the materials, so much wood out there.
One of the ventures that we started, I don't know, 8, 9 years ago is called the Master Manager Program. We offer a program online for 40 hours that will give every entrepreneur everything that they get in an MBA program from Harvard, Princeton, or Yale in 2 years at 100 grand a year. And we started it in my company because we had a couple of issues. And I said, I want every person that works for our business to have a common language of income statement, balance sheet, strategic planning, how to hire and fire. And we did it in my company, and the results were spectacular. Yeah, I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico. There's one or two artists here. When we did in-person sessions, I've always included 4 or 5 artists in that because artists amaze me. They're their own promotions department, their own shipping department, their own accounting department, their own sales department. Oh, yeah, they got to create too. They're amazing. And the artists came and were intermixed with me and with other business people of my acquaintance. They were always the quickest done with the assignments. They got everything right. They went home and deployed none of the knowledge.
Why?
I suspect it's because of an artistic suspicion of money, that artists think that grubbing for money is something they need to whine about but don't want to do something about. We gave them the tools to do something about it, and there was a big disconnect in the deployment of those tools and their knowledge of them. Their knowledge of them was great.
And yet some artists make a great deal of money.
Those are incredibly gifted and rare unicorns. Yeah, like Larry Bell here in New Mexico is an artist who makes a great deal of money, very famous. But I mean, I live in the third largest art market in North America. The number of very successful artists are truly unicorns, where they have that sense of self promotion. And sometimes they are born with a silver foot in their mouth and they know the Gettys and the blah, 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 blah. But often they just have sharpest elbows. Basquiat, it was in New York and a colorful character. Met a lot of important people. Had no background in that world at all, but he had a lot of chutzpah. Dillinger said, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Whether you're an actor or a financier, you need to be where the money is. If you want to be a great investment banker, you don't do it in Topeka, you do it in Manhattan. If you want to be a great art dealer, you don't do it in Black Mountain, you do it in London. And those markets are fiercely competitive. But the nice thing about competition is you've got a line to measure yourself against. If you have the most successful art gallery in Asheville, North Carolina, you're measuring yourself by the standards of Asheville, North Carolina. Let me not be pejorative to Asheville. That bar's not very high.
The artists who make money and the artists who don't, is there anything other than the disdain for money that you think might be part of the reason why that happens?
I think you've got to, I go back to the qualities of a great artist, their own promotion department, their own sales department, their own marketing department. And I know a number of artists who are pretty successful and are less talented than others, but they are very effective at self-promotion, building their name up. But they know really that if I tell you that's a great piece of art on the wall behind your head, suddenly you've got a third-party opinion that validates what it is you've done. You can build on that. And I don't think that treads outside of do right, because art is such a subjective arena. People vote with their feet. I think, among poetry slammers, it was one of the things that was so remarkable about witnessing the event at the Leaf Global Arts Festival is the audience was going crazy for those folks again and again and again across at least, 8 or 10 of those poets. That's important. That's impressive.
And also, we were competing for $1,000 prize. Who's going to win this?
Yeah.
Will this poet come 1/10 of a point ahead of the other one? I don't
Yeah.
know. Wait, I've got to hang around and see. So there's a drive for that as well.
Yeah, no, and that's one of the great things about competition. You can be the greatest artist in Hoquiam, Washington, and maybe your stuff is world class. Nobody knows where you are. You start in the subway in Manhattan, And suddenly David Geffen runs across your art and boom, away you go. But the odds of David Geffen running across your art are much better in the subway in Manhattan than in a back road in Kentucky.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Speaking of back roads and speaking of smaller areas, one of the reasons that you came to Leaf Global Arts because you are acquainted with the Navajo weavers in your part of
Yes.
the world. And I would love for you, as we move into the second part of our time together, tell me more about why you're drawn to the weavers, what they have taught you about business, what you know that you didn't know before you came in contact with them. What's all that about?
We're all acculturated in one way or another from youth. I am a Western man. My great grandfather came west in 1869 after the Civil War, failed a lot of things, and then got settled up in the Pacific Northwest. My grandfather traveled all over the West and had a fascination with indigenous people, those who were here before Europeans arrived. My mom grew up on a farm in Quebec where they raised rocks, very poor but really smart. Her family valued education, and she married my dad. And in the course of working in our business in the pulp and paper industry, they traveled by car all over North America and got down into the Southwest, where my dad had spent a lot of time, where my grandfather spent a lot of time, and got fascinated with the indigenous art, primarily weaving and jewelry. And so I grew up driving across the country with mom and dad, and we stop at a trading post up in the Four Corners country, and we'd spend a couple hours there looking at rugs and jewelry, and my dad would buy my mom things. And by world standards, all that stuff is still a huge value for the artistic quality. So I have always been close to that. My work in Indian country up in the Northwest was around tribes in the Northwest. I was trustee at the Evergreen State College, and we had very large native matriculants. I was close to that community and watching the development and evolution. Of course, I was around when the casinos arrived and native folks got to take the money back from the white folks and the evolution of that from a governance standpoint. But I got down here and, in the artistic community of Santa Fe, made many friends who had deep, deep roots in the native arts and crafts here. Went up to the Totalina Trading Post in Two Gray Hills, was introduced to Mark and Linda Winter, who own that establishment, and they do a biannual weaving festival there. I went up and I met Irene Benali, who we brought back to Two Gray Hills. I was just dazzled at the system. I set the art aside, the system of native weaving, the business side, is just fascinating because by and large, Irene raises all of her own sheep, Angora, goats. She collects wool. She takes it up, have it carded and spun in Mora, New Mexico. Irene's particular talent among all the weaving community in Two Gray Hills is she can produce colors. And the thing about Two Gray Hills rug is there's no artificial dye. You go from beige to black, all with wools that are blended together in the spinning process to create a color. By and large, the weaving community in all of the Dene lands, Dene is Navajo for the people, is incredibly poor, very little cash, and tends mostly dominated by what we call the grandmothers. And Irene would be an example of a grandmother. But these ladies run the enterprise soup to nuts. They raise the sheep, they shear, card, and spin the wool, and then they weave. Pamela Brown, who came down Two Gray Hills, she was at my home, and she's I need my loom. When she stayed in Two Gray Hills, she'd bring her loom with her everywhere. She needed to weave. She lives to weave, and the best of the Dene weavers are just like that. And there's an underlying social current, and I may delve in a little conjecture here. And the way the system works is Mark and Linda run the trading post, and you come in as a weaver and you buy flour and beans and milk and whatever you need on trade, on credit. And Mark says, okay, well, you owe me so much. And when you bring in a rug, I will liquidate that for you. We'll pay off your debt. If there's change left over, you get that, and then I'm going to sell it. He's very honest and straightforward. He's lost a lot more money in that deal than he's made. He'll keep a substantial margin for the trading post because he's got bad debts, because it might take 5 years to sell, that piece by Navé. And the system has worked for many, many years. Without that, those communities would die because he is the source of groceries and everything that they need. The neat thing is when a grandmother creates a rug, she's got a little pinch of cash. And there's not much else in that neck of the woods that generates cash.
These people that do this artistic weaving, how do they view business that's different than perhaps a traditional view of business would be?
They see as precious everything that is a part of their lives. So the weaving festival, if there were noodles of wool left over after a carding demonstration, separating the fibers, the grandmothers duck them right up because they know that that will increase their gross margin. They may not think of it as gross margin, but they know that to create a noodle of wool, to create a ball of yarn, that takes some time, it takes some resource. They'll be all over grabbing that stuff. The other feature in landscape, a Dene weaver will finish a large piece, 3x6. Depending on the weaver, depending on the fineness, they're somewhere between $5,000 and $15,000. And they'll have been relying on Mark to fund their lives while they're working on that piece, but they're not at all shy about trying to sell it directly or to sell it to another dealer. If they think that they can get more money by selling to Navé versus totally in a trading post, they'll be in touch with Navé. They're entrepreneurs and they have a debt to Mark that they got to settle. But if they sold that piece for, full retail to a collector in Scottsdale, they got a lot of cash. They can afford to pay Mark off.
So Mark is doing this for the love of it as well as for the business of it, it sounds like.
I always tell people, if you want to catch fish, you got to stand in the stream. And Mark and Linda have been standing in the stream for 40 years. You're fishing, you dream of catching that 36-inch brown trout. And they've caught a few of those because they're standing in the stream. A gentleman at Black Mountain who wanted Mark's assessment of some weavings his family had collected. Mark looked at him and said they're not worth very much. But occasionally somebody will come along and say, well, I have this abouche. And say, oh, yeah. Okay, that's a $100,000 rug. I'll take it for 35.
The rugs, Navajo, the West, you said, I'm a Western man. That's identity. We all have an identity. I grew up in Western North Carolina.
Yeah.
I've always thought of myself as a Carolina boy. I've thought of myself as a mountain fellow. It's about identity. So when you say Western man, what does it mean to be Western? How do you measure that? And of course, it's anybody that grows up in the West would identify with what you're saying. But I'd like for you to unpack it because so much of what we talk about in our culture today is about identity. Who am I? Where do I belong? How do I fit in?
I like people who have an identity. I love New Yorkers. I even love Los Angelinos. Yeah. I have a buddy who's 87 years old. He was born in Las Vegas, Nevada. Now think about that for a second. The virtues of being a Western man are a love of cultures that surround nature. My family was in the timber business for 150 years. I still manage timber, understand it real, real well. I have friends who are ranchers and they are great custodians of the land. I have friends who are miners and they understand what it is they're due. Here in New Mexico, I've met people in the oil industry. The West has been, as my great-grandfather, his family landed in Massachusetts in 1796, where the farms got cut up in multiple generations to where nobody could make any money farming. And he came west in 1869 to unlimited opportunities. In many measures, the West still betokens that. You got to get a permit from the BLM, maybe. If you go to Burning Man and you look across the playa and you see miles and miles and miles of dead flat alkaline plain, That's inspiring. I mean, it excites something in your imagination. I'm heavily invested in Clarksdale, Mississippi, the genetic home of the blues. First time I went down there, I saw all of this art that was derived from paintings of rows of growing cotton, a little bit of cotton and a bit of, oh God, that's really cool. By the time I saw the 700th one, I thought, oh, now I get it. That's just what art here is. It's like going to Carmel, and if I see one more painting of waves crashing on rocks, I'm going to throw up. Art is generated by what stimulates us. And I live just down the road from where George O'Keeffe's last home was. And Ms. O'Keeffe came to the West in 1922-ish and saw things here that were so different than New York, so different than the East. Mabel Dodge Lujan drove 2 days up to Taos from Santa Fe, and she left Santa Fe in 1922 because it was too snooty. She ended up marrying the war chief of the Taos Pueblo, Tony Lujan. I could sit with my father and hear about driving up the Alcan Highway before there was an Alcan Highway in 1925. The spirit of adventure, the endless possibility of the West makes me a Western man. I just got back from the North Pole.
What would make you attracted to the North Pole?
Good question. Um, I grew up on a little harbor that was one of the places that explorers mistook for the mouth of the Northwest Passage. So I grew up with this idea that the Northwest Passage was this thing that society, that mankind really hunted for, and people died endeavoring to find it. A year ago, last summer, I was able to transit the Northwest Passage on an icebreaker and see the thing that these people I grew up with, Vancouver, Robert Gray, all these great explorers, I could do that. And in the course of doing that, then of course I was introduced to polar explorers. That wasn't a part of my upbringing. My upbringing was the Northwest Passage and all the people who couldn't find it. But when I had a chance to go to the North Pole, I took it. As I tell people, I end up going to the last best places in the nick of time. Whatever your beliefs about climate change, we are so far past the tipping point that you can put up all the solar panels you want, all the wind power you want, ain't going to make a difference.
What's going to become of us, David? What did you learn at the North Pole when you arrived in the nick of time?
I was up in the Northwest Passage with my good friend Gassin Bardot of Under the Pole. And he and I are hanging out together, and he does undersea research. You can look him up online. He dives very, very deep. He dives 600 feet down, and he's found at 600 feet, think about this, photosynthetic coral. So coral that is growing by photosynthesis in what we think of as total darkness. How does it do that? I gave Gassane the challenge, and he's created some capsules that his teams can go down to be at 400 feet and not have to go through all the decompression stuff to continue there. I said, Gassane, come up with a way of accommodating 1 billion people under the ocean by the year 2100.
I'm pausing because I've never thought of that. What was his
Oh,
response?
yeah. He says, well, it's going to be hard. And I said, no, same technology you take for Bozo the Clown and Muscatoon to put people on Mars, but it takes more calories to put a 5/8 inch hex head bolt into orbit than it does for you to simply walk off the beach in Santa Monica. And you are engaged intimately and immediately with an area more vast than the entire landmass of the Earth.
How many people have tossed that idea out? Is this an original one with you, or did you come by it having a conversation with somebody, or were you just standing on the deck?
I grew up with the undersea world of Jacques Cousteau. One of his first season episodes were a pod that he had in the Mediterranean off Marseille, where people were living and interacting. I go down to the Caribbean. NASA had in St. John's test facility, and they were testing to see how people would live in an isolated environment so they could go to Mars. I said, there's a planet a lot easier to get to than Mars. It's right here. Take those same technologies, because they're talking about how do I grow food in a spaceship? A lot easier under the ocean, much, much easier.
And the biggest problem under the ocean's the pressure.
Well, it depends on where you are and how you build your capsule.
But what I'm thinking is it's a lot less a problem than what you would encounter on Mars.
Oh yeah, I
By
mean,
far.
there's a little bit of oxygen in the water here. There's no oxygen between here and Mars. It's harder to get there than it is to take a Tesla to Wyoming.
David, that's a fantastic place to wind down on. As we finish our time together, how would you like to close this?
Well, Nave, the sad thing, and we're seeing it with the hurricanes now. I had a boat down the island of Carriacou, which was the safest island in the Caribbean. Cuba, Jamaica, those places have very little capacity to recover and rebuild infrastructure. The calamities that await us are upon us. I grew up in a part of time in the Netherlands. My dad was an engineer, so you look at all these dikes and things. A bunch of Lutherans decided they wanted to live underwater, and they figured out how to do it with the dikes in the Netherlands. So these problems are within our grasp, but they are not within our will. I'm trying to influence people's will, as we're just going to clean up Bangladesh when it's a big freaking mess and there are 500,000 dead people, and that will happen within a decade.
How do you influence people's will?
Well, the reason that I do a lot of things, go up to the Navajo country, go to the North Pole, is you've got to attract people either to a firsthand experience of their own. And you lived in Asheville when the floods came. Asheville was this bastion of safety and purity and wholesomeness. And we have friends who were without potable water for 40 days. They can be spokespeople for what calamity looks like. But it's like until you put your hand on a hot pan, you don't know what it is. It's going to happen slowly. Millions of people will die in the process of enlightenment, not by the hand of some evil ruler, although, people always want to blame somebody. We have met the enemy, and it is us.
So the best thing to do then is to have conversations like this,
Yep.
connect like you and I did during the Leaf Global Arts Festival, sitting down there eating food from a food stand, just talking about whatever, having Walter Parks walk up and say hello with his wife Margot, and then your sweetheart Deborah agreeing to play some music with
Yeah.
Walter. Walter plays. You and Deborah
Yeah.
sit through the poetry slam at Leaf, and then you and I have this conversation. And I ask you, well, what about Will? How
Yeah.
does it play out? This is how it plays out right here.
Yeah. And, there are all kinds of opportunities to build community. And we'll use Leaf as a great example. Jennifer Pickering, the founder, was introducing me to people who had come from Africa. I spent a lot of time in Africa. There are lots of stories from all over the world. You spend time in the Philippines. The Philippines is going to have a problem in some of the out islands for sure. Probably is already. And you build community by hearing firsthand. When I talk about, the Northwest Passage and North Pole, I'm giving testimony to things I've witnessed myself. I'm not relating something that AI chatbotted me to.
Firsthand, word of mouth, gathering at the poetry slam at Leaf, you and I getting together with 3 or 4 people somewhere, sometime to have a conversation,
Yep.
calling up a bunch of people if you have a product to sell and asking them to consider your idea, person to person, slow process. That's old school. Are we here at old school? Is that where we belong? It seems like
Sure.
it.
I mean, it's probably only worked for about a couple million years. The translation of any technology from the quote Stone Age to now is a process of storytelling. I commend you in what it is you're doing, because I know you only have interesting people on your podcast. I'm
Uh,
one of them.
you one of them. I absolutely have a lot of great people. I've had 400 of them.
And even if you've only got 5 listeners or 50,000 or 500,000, they're being influenced by the voice of someone firsthand who can tell them, about weaving, who can tell them about business, who can tell them about car mechanics, whatever your topic is. And your job, which I think you've, in this time we've spent together, is to ask probative questions, to invite the imagination of those you've invited aboard to take the lid off and let it roll, and then to encourage the broad sharing. I would hope that you have more than 5 subscribers who find value in coming to your podcast regularly.
I do have people who listen, and people even come up to me in person and say, I love what you do.
Yeah.
And I'm always grateful when they say that. And I'm in this until I'm not. One day we are not here anymore. And I do it because you and I talk, and then you and I get something meaningful between us. And one person somewhere hears a little bit of what we do, and then they spread it to someone else. And that's it. Been going on, like you said, millions of years.
Yeah.
Why stop now?
Well, Nave, I will commend to you something that, for example, I commend. I work with a lot of multi-generational family companies, and that is that you have got to be consciously preparing the next generation. I mean, if we were doing this and there were, and Dominique were on your shoulder, listening and learning and developing her own sense of how to collect and disseminate broad information. Well, now it's not going to end with you. Yeah, Mark and I struggle. That's why Pamela was back at Black Mountain. That when the last grandmother dies, native weaving in the Dene land may die with her. We don't want to see that happen, and we're working very hard to sustain that.
And that's what Leaf Global Arts and Leaf Festival and Jennifer Pickering's been doing. That's what I do. That's what you do. And today's today, tomorrow's tomorrow. I'll be here tomorrow, and I'll be here the day after tomorrow, and then one day I won't be. And that when that day comes, I hope I have enough sense to take a deep breath and say, well, I showed up, my friends showed up, and we did what we could.
Yeah. No, we only do what we can, and better to really take great satisfaction in moving the needle with the resources we have than fighting the forces that we can't affect.
Couldn't agree more. And on that note, David, we've arrived at our end of our time together. So, David Lamb, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to spend this time with me. I appreciate it.
Love you, my brother. God bless you for your service to mankind and for all the courtesies you extended to our weaving embassy at Black Mountain.
Well, I'm glad to do it, and I'm much appreciated.
All righty.
And there you go, my friends. Thus concludes my conversation with David Lamb. As you could probably tell by this conversation, David's ideas around having fun, making money, and doing right certainly has my attention. When he first offered these 3 principles to me, I wondered, what does having fun mean? What does making money mean? What does doing right mean? These are clearly subjective questions. Having fun, making money, and doing right has a different meaning for me, a different application for me than it probably does for you. For me, I measure having fun by how much I'm smiling, how good I feel, how complete I feel within the context of whatever's going on in the moment. For example, from a business point of view, I always have a great deal of fun when I host a live workshop and the people arrive, when I greet the people individually. Hi, thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to spending some time with you. I'm looking forward to working with you. I'm smiling the whole time. From a non-business point of view, I have the same experience when I greet an old friend, someone whom I've known a long time, maybe haven't seen in a year or so. We get back together and pick up where we left off. I'm smiling. I really, really enjoy that. Another example of having fun, at the Leaf Retreat this past May, Dominique Warfield erected a maypole, put beautiful ribbons on the maypole, and 50, 60 people gathered around, held those ribbons, and wound them around the maypole. They were having fun. The music in the background was playing. Folks were smiling. They were interacting, having this deep community experience around the maypole. Another example of having fun. Having fun for you might mean you go to a street fair and dance for a couple of hours with people you know and people you don't know. Now we turn to making money. Making money is a very different issue because we all have a relationship with money. Some of us have a good relationship with money. Other of us have neutral. Others have a negative relationship with money. Making money, what does that mean? As David pointed out, making money is a whole lot more than piling up a whole bunch of cash in the bank account or under the mattress. For the record, I have no problem piling up cash in the bank account or under the mattress. As David pointed out, making money implies being solvent, being financially responsible. Or as he put it, you got to pay the rent. So from a business point of view, when you're doing something you're committed to, something you deeply care about, something you can identify as a calling, and of course the call comes from the internal sensibilities around who you are. So when you're having fun doing something you love to do and you're most likely working your strength base, your chances of achieving excellence and by extension making money go way up because you're putting the energy of self into the project. And it can be anything. Doesn't really matter what it is. If you can square your sense of who you are, what you want to do, your sense of belonging with what you do to make a living, then your chances, as I said, of making money and achieving excellence really do rise. It's no guarantee. Nothing's guaranteed in life. But when you go at it like this, you do up your chances. It's easier said than done here because it's difficult to find that sweet spot, that thing that you love to do, and pairing it with some way of making a living that generates money. And I've had both experiences. I've had times when I really was not squared up with what I was doing to make a living, and it was awful for me. Conversely, when I have been squared up and doing things that I truly, truly enjoy and know that are working for me in a harmonious way, the money seems to come along just fine. And before I move to the third principle, do right, I want to say that this isn't something you achieve and it stays that way. Life offers many ups and downs. It's how you navigate those ups and downs that make life meaningful and rewarding. So now we arrive at the third principle, do right, which sounds like a title for a song. Could go like this: do right tonight when the evening is bright and there's time for 1,000 stories to tell. So when I think of doing right, I don't really think of the big grand scope of doing things right all the time. Like I said, life has its ups and downs. Nobody achieves perfection. Nobody's ever going to achieve doing it right all the time, but it can be aspirational, can be something that you move towards. It requires a lot of thought because if you're going to do right, you have to figure out what doing wrong means to you. You have to make a personal decision about how conditional right and wrong is. Since we're only a couple of minutes away from concluding this show, I can give you a small example of what doing right means to me. For me, doing right means paying close attention to the person right in front of you. When I do it, I'm not paying attention to that person because I want them to approve of me or to notice me. I'm doing it because I've decided the person right in front of me is the most important person in the world, and they deserve my respect and my attention. And the third element is giving my respect and my attention with a blank slate, which is another way of saying I reserve my judgments until later. By valuing that one person in front of me, it teaches my system, not just my conscious awareness, but my whole system, that valuing the people around me is one of the best ways to do business that I can think of. From the commercial point of view, when I greet people who have arrived at my live workshops, I do this on Zoom. I just enjoy it more when it's live together in person kind of situations. When I greet those people, each person is the most important person in the world. I'm greeting them with a blank slate, with my curiosity, my respect, and my attention. So to expand the notion of making money, when you approach people like this, you make a kind of wealth that goes way beyond the dollars under the mattress or in the bank account. And one thing I most especially like about David's principles, have fun, make money, do right. Those three principles sum up a comprehensive strategy for not only making a living, but making a meaningful, worthwhile life, which doesn't happen overnight. It takes an entire lifetime. And on that note, we have arrived at the end of this show. So thank you ever so much for tuning in to Provocative Conversations from Twice 5 Miles Radio. I'm your host, James Navé. This show airs every weekend on WPVM-FM and also KCEI-FM Cultural Energy Radio in Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Devine Dial, for managing WPVM-FM, Robin Collier for managing KCEI-FM. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song, walterparks.com for Warren Walters music. And if you would like to reach out to me, Navé at jamesnavé.com. That's how you can find me. I would love to hear from you. So when you're floating around out there in the world, I hope you figure out how to have fun, make money, and do right. And while you're out there wandering around, here's hoping you and I catch each other on that turnaround somewhere down the line.